Welcome to the Vantage HR Influencers Podcast. This podcast is sponsored by Vantage Circle, the simple and AI-powered rewards and recognition platform for employee engagement.
Ever heard the phrase, numbers don't lie? Well, let's talk about numbers then. Deloitte reveals that companies promoting diversity are thriving, boasting a staggering 2.3 times higher cash flow per employee. And if that's not impressive enough, Gartner chimes in with the revelation that inclusive teams can supercharge performance by a jaw-dropping 30% in high diversity environments. These statistics underscore the undeniable value of diversity and inclusion in the workplace. But there's a missing piece of the puzzle: recognizing and rewarding diverse contributions. That's where our discussion today comes in. We are delving into the pressing need for impactful global strategies in crafting inclusive rewards and recognition programs. These aren't just feel-good initiatives. They are vital tools for driving success and ensuring every member of your team feels valued. So, dear listeners, welcome to another episode of the Vantage Influencers Podcast. I'm your host, Sanjeevani Saikia, and today we have with us Meghdoot Mukherjee, Head Compensation and Benefits India COE at Booking Holdings. Let's begin our conversation with him. Hi Meghdoot, thank you so much for joining in today's conversation.
Hi Sanjeevani, thanks for having me here. Pleasure is all mine.
Before we dive into today's topic, Meghdoot, I'd love to hear a bit about your professional journey so far.
Yeah, so let me keep it short and sweet. Sanjeevani, I'm in the 13th or 14th year of my professional journey. I started way back in 2010 in an HR tech role. Moved across a bunch of organizations in multiple roles thereafter, typically looking at things like learning and development and sales capability building in one of the largest paints company in India. Spent quite a bit of time, almost half a decade, in core customer facing consulting roles, largely HR consulting roles in multiple progressive caliber. And then for the last 4 years I am managing or leading total rewards, first with AB InBev and today now in Booking Holdings India. That's my journey. Happy to double click on any specific area that you want me to talk about.
Wonderful. That's perfectly fine. Thank you so much for sharing your journey with us. I truly appreciate it. So, Meghdoot, with your permission, I'd like to begin today's conversation on the topic.
Sure. Looking forward to it.
Great. As you know, many companies today recognize the importance of fostering inclusive environments that cater to workforce diverse needs. In this context, I believe considering strategies for rewards and recognition becomes very crucial, as it directly impacts employee well-being and productivity. So, according to you, what are some of the key considerations for companies looking to develop global strategies for inclusive R&R, and particularly in today's diverse workforce?
Correct. I think, Sanjeevani, thanks for asking this question. I think this is a question which it's pretty close to my heart. Topics like diversity are no more good to do topics, but I think is absolutely essential for businesses to thrive and grow.
Yes.
Look, even while we talk about R&R and reward strategies, I think it's very important for all of us to go back to the why part of the conversation. Why diversity and the need for us to create an inclusive workplace. I think as we mature as a country and as a society, I think there is a need for us to include people into our formal work setups and create avenues so that more and more talented people can come in and work. While that is a vision, I think rewards and recognition would play a very key would play a very key role in enabling that journey. Now, if I have to deep dive and talk a little more about it, I think whether it is compensation, and if I kind of deep dive and break the different elements of rewards and recognition, whether it's compensation, whether it's benefits, whether it's well-being programs for employees, or whether it's workplace enablements, I think there is a need to look to design programs and create strategies with a conscious lookout for uh, inclusiveness, be it a total reward strategy or a total compensation strategy, or be it a total well-being strategy. I think when the strategy is being culled out and is being developed, I think one of the key design considerations should be inclusivity at all points of time. Now
Yes.
that might mean, and I would give a specific context from a benefit strategy standpoint. I think that might mean that are we being conscious to the fact that hey, we might employ diverse talent, and how do we make the lives of diverse talents working with us a bit more easier? So can we ensure that some of our insurance programs are gender inclusive? Some of our benefits that we are extending to employees are not excluding a set of employees, and I think that's important. So I think it's important that we take a very clear call when we are creating a strategy as part of our design considerations to be much more flexible, uh, to be much more inclusive in our approach, so that we are not consciously excluding a bunch of our employee base or a bunch of our colleagues we work with, if that makes sense, Sanjeevni.
Yes, it does. Yeah. Again, creating R&R initiatives that genuinely reflect and respect the diverse backgrounds and preferences of employees is imperative. And somewhere I believe that by understanding various cultural norms and to some extent individual preferences, companies can ensure that their R&R programs are truly inclusive. But to have a better understanding of this, Meghdoot, I'd like to ask you, how can organizations ensure that their R&R initiatives are truly inclusive? And are there any particular standards or norms that you guys are following?
Yeah, I think again a great question. So Sanjeevni, look, there are certain process or systemic interventions that companies and organizations like us employ to ensure that the processes remain fair, the processes remain inclusive, the processes take into account uh, folks from different diverse backgrounds, and more importantly, the processes are able to clearly point out when there is a discrimination, when there is a systemic discrimination happening in a part of the organization. I'll give you a couple of examples here.
Yeah, sure.
Look, I think one of the very common practice, and which we see more and more organizations taking up, we are also doing something around it, is of gender pay gap analysis, right? Now, if you look at literature available all across the world, it's called out that women employees, and this is an example, but women employees typically at equivalent roles tend to, there is a catch up often with compensation for male employees, which means that women employees at similar roles across the globe are often at a disadvantage as compared to their male colleagues. Now, is this a practice that we would want to, imbibe or continue in the organization? Definitely no. uh, However, we are essentially talking about organizations which employ thousands of people. And while we would want the process to be bias free and fair to start with, uh, typically a process would corrupt itself over a period of time. So, what we as an organizations do typically from time to time, and this is a biannual exercise or even an annual exercise sometimes, is that we work with consulting partners to ensure that we run analysis and we run detailed studies, break our workforce into cohorts, manager groups, and run, statistically valid, employ statistically valid techniques to check that, hey, is there a systemic discrimination, that we see in our workplace between the two groups of employees, right?
Yeah.
Now, look, if we look at data in large cohorts, it's often that we see that, hey, everything is fine. But the idea is we use analysis which is statistically valid. We break data into the right cohorts, into the right team groups, so that in case there are teams where such issues are prevalent, might be hidden, if we look at large pools of data, we are able to isolate these cases and take preventive and corrective actions around it. So I think this is a specific example that we as an organization, spend time and money with. And this is again, as part of a growing trend, gender pay gap analysis is something that a lot of leading organizations do. Uh, Again, when we bake new initiatives, bake uh, plans for running the regular, cycles more efficiently, I think there are conscious efforts inside at least our organization today in Booking Holdings and across several such organizations to drive sensitivities across people, to drive sensitization workshop, to ensure that the unconscious biases that people often have uh, can be addressed through proper training, coaching, and mentoring, so that at the end of the day, we are not propagating a workplace which has employees with with biased mindset, which then creates challenges to overall terms of inclusivity. So that's some of the approaches that organizations would largely take, more from a systemic standpoint, to ensure that some of the inclusivity related challenges are addressed better and we are able to appreciate diversity within our work groups.
Okay. There's one more thing that I'm very curious to ask, and I would love to know that from you. When we talk about R&R,
Mhm.
do you think that somewhere R&R initiatives works best to motivate male employees than female employees, or is it the other way around?
Look, Sanjeevani, yeah, look, I would say that, look, from a objective standpoint of any R&R program, I think the objective should be very clear. The objective should be, hey, we would want certain behaviors in our organization. Now, the idea is, there are two large legs that we would employ to drive a set of desired behaviors. One set of interventions is, are we training people or are we sensitizing people to appreciate some of these behaviors that we want to drive? Second, are we creating the right incentives for people to demonstrate those behaviors? So if you typically look at bonus plans, incentive plans, those would be instruments that are largely leveraged by organization to reward and shape behavior and then reinforce results from people. Now, look, while there is no data which says that a particular type of R&R program, whether it's awards or whether it's bonuses or whether it's spot incentive programs, motivate a group of employees better than the other group, which means that it works better on male employees as compared to female employees. While there is no hard data, what typically happens in organizations is that, largely, we have seen, and there is enough data being present, that because of mindset challenges that people demonstrate at work, one group of employees, typically males, are often at an advantage as compared to female employees, when some of these rewards are distributed. Now, those are conversations that we would like to address going forward. This is not typically restricted to an organization. These are large trends that you see across organization, across countries, and I think the entire movement across organizations in the D&I space is just to address some of these challenges. So typically, historically, yes, R&R outcomes have catered or suited a group of employees more than they have suited the other group of employees. Typically, men employees are at an advantage with regards to outcomes, but that's not because it works better to motivate male employees. It's essentially a systemic challenge that we as a society have kind of faced over a period of time. You would not only see such biases existing in formal corporate workplaces, but if you extend the conversation a little bit, more, and you look at the world of sports, you would also see that male athletes being paid at certain levels versus female athletes who are typically for similar rated or competitions being paid very, very differently. So I think largely this is the systemic societal challenges that we are kind of dealing with at this point of time. The way forward would be to take a conscious systemic approach, so that we are able to disassociate ourselves, remove the active biases that society has, and are able to take the best leap forward in a much more structured way.
Okay. Although there is no hard data to support any of the claim, but your response was really good and it has answered my question. So thank you, Meghdoot. Now moving on.
Thank you.
Now, moving on, across multinational corporations, we have seen examples of R&R strategies that have worked well in fostering better employee engagement, from
Mhm.
flexible work hours to wellness programs and even mindfulness sessions for that matter. These initiatives have made significant positive impact on employee well-being globally. So it would be great if you could share some insights into these successful R&R strategies that had significant positive impact on employee well-being on a global scale.
Yeah, I think Sanjeevni, thanks for asking this question. Again, very, very pertinent in today's context. Look, employee well-being has taken a front seat now largely, and this is a response to us how, as a society, we have evolved post-COVID. I think largely, if you look at the world of benefits and well-being, I think it was primarily compliance-driven, largely so in India as well. Some of the more matured economies in the West, uh, did have a slightly evolved approach to well-being. However, uh, typically in India, we were compliance driven and we were checklist driven. The approach was that, okay, we would want to offer a bunch of benefits. Let's look at a baseline benefits and well-being initiatives, and let's offer people as something good to have, baseline offerings. However, the world has changed significantly after 2022
Yes.
or 2021. Look, in companies, and this is a growing trend. If you look at any possible industry reports, I think the reports point us to one single direction, and that is that for employees, uh, and this is again across the different generations of workforce that we have in organizations. If we look at folks who are Gen X's, largely people who would be 45 plus in today's context. If you look at millennials, people who would largely be again 28 to 30 plus. And then if you look at the Gen Zs, which are 22-ish pluses, I think well-being across all the employee cohorts have started, making more sense, and the appeal of well-being and benefits program has increased. I think companies have employed different strategies. One, I think if you look at well-being and benefits budget for organizations, I think the well-being and benefit spends have gone up. Second, I think companies have started looking at flexible benefit offerings as a key cornerstone to address employee sentiments. Like, the idea is that not all employees inside a workspace has similar needs and are at similar stages as far as their life is concerned. So why should a benefits and a well-being strategy uh, be why should we paint all employees with a single benefits and well-being strategy? The idea is, can we differentiate employees, make it more relevant and personal, and make it a much more personalized experience for them? Can we provide employees with a choice to select benefits that makes more sense to them? Now, for an employee who lives with aged parents, who has children, and who has a family, insurance might be extremely important for that employee.
Yes.
Whereas for an employee who is a Gen Z, starting his or her career, probably fitness and overall well-being, not in the insured benefit space, but things like, hey, can I access a gym membership? What is the organization doing in terms of my learning? Can I spend an equivalent amount in my own capability development? I think some of these questions assume greater importance. So I think organizations have started consciously taking calls to incorporate choices, to provide employees with choices which help employees make selections which suits their lifestyle needs. That's one. Second, I think what a lot of organizations have started doing as an add-on is sponsor a lot of wellness initiative for employees. Now, things like annual medical checkups and I mean, advanced coverages were things that were dreamt of at one point of time in corporate India, was not very, very common. However, if you typically look at evolving tech organizations. Today, I think that's a standard offering that a lot of organizations and similar to us, extend to employees, saying that, hey, why don't you, sign up for a preventive, uh, you know, wellness check that enables you to, diagnose in case there are any risks that you have medically, and then that also enables you to take preventive actions in a timely manner. Uh, Organizations are also sponsoring, you know, dental and vision programs for their employees, again with the mindset that, hey, we know we can't cover all possible ailments that you would have, but but dental and vision, treatments are typically very, very expensive. So we would protect you against the first line. So we would be your first line of defense when something affects you, and we would kind of pick up some liability that you would need to incur to get yourself treated or your family treated, right? So those are approaches, Sanjeevni, that organizations are consciously baking into their benefit strategy and their wellness programs. You spoke about mindfulness sessions.
Yes.
Organizations are now spending time, effort, and resources. It's more about, it's just not money that organizations are spending, but time, effort, and resources into curating well-being conversations so that employees uh, leverage some of these to kind of build much more consciousness, because well-being at the end of the day starts through self-awareness. So it's only when uh, I as an employee am aware about, hey, these are my well-being options that are available on the table, these are the possible avenues that I can explore, it's only then the entire journey of well-being starts in the mind. So I think companies are doing a bunch of things, right from enablement and communication and awareness building, to ensure that some of these challenges can be addressed, and the offerings are made more relevant to the multi generational workforce that are present today in workplaces.
There's one more thing that I'd like to ask here regarding demographic. Is it R&R demographic specific? Because somewhere
Mhm.
I have come across this data that European countries, again, may not offer a lot of employee engagement or R&R
Mhm.
resources as much as India or maybe United States would. So do you think that differs from, again, geography to geography?
Yes, so Sanjeevni, it does. So I would say it's so if we typically look at the demographic splits, right? If we typically look at demographic
Yeah.
splits like age and gender, I think you would not see a differentiation. However, where you would see a differentiation is across locations and across countries. And Sanjeevni, there are a couple of reasons for it. One, I think as uh, so so if you look at different countries, and if you look at what people want across different geographies, I think because we essentially have very different societal norms, the cultural context in which we operate is very, very different. Uh, Look, in the West, and countries largely in Europe are much flatter societies, much more egalitarian societies, with stronger protection provided by the government in most cases to
Yes.
protect
Yeah.
themselves from some of the risks that some of them might come across. Now, if you look at societies in India and our cultural context, we are still fairly hierarchical as a society, with significant power distance across levels, grades, and so on and so forth. Unfortunately, the way our provisions are structured, some of our social security net that exists in probably a developed country in the West, and this is largely Europe, it does not exist here. Now, if you compare our social security programs with social security programs probably in Scandinavia, Denmark, Sweden, Finland, or even countries like Netherlands and England, I think we definitely fall short. And hence there is a very strong appetite among employees in India that, hey, because we do not have a social security net as strong as theirs, uh, can our employers pick some of the responsibilities and cover up uh, in case we face certain risks? So I think that's one part of the problem. I think US is I think US is slightly more extreme as compared to us, because if you typically look at some of the social security parameters, while it's great, from an overall well-being construct, uh, while we still have, with our socialist lineage in the country, we still have certain evolved protection and guidelines as employers to follow. The US market is fairly much more, laissez-faire in its operations, which means that uh, worker rights are fairly diluted in US, and hence there is again a need or a desire from employee groups to say, "Hey, as an organization, can you help me with sponsored time off? Can you really help me with a paid maternity leave?" Now, if you look at India, Sanjeevni, and this is probably a relevant example, the law in India says that every female employee would be provided with 6 months of maternity leave. Now, that's a protection given by law. You would see countries in Europe, and I have colleagues in some of them, wherein they say that, hey, with partial payouts, you can enjoy maternity leave up to 15 to 20 months. However, in certain states in the United States, uh, you do not have a paid maternity leave concept at all. There are organizations which have started providing this benefit, because again, employees would, there is a growing appetite from employees saying that, hey, you are giving me salary, that's fine, but if I have a baby, how do you protect my employment? How do you protect my interest at that point of time? Can you provide me with paid leave for 6 months or for 4 months, so that I can take care of my family as well? So I think the cultural context plays a very important role.
Yes. Yeah. Meghdoot, despite the potential benefits of inclusive R&R strategies, implementing them on a global scale can pose unique challenges due to cultural differences and regional regulations. Again, I strongly believe navigating these obstacles requires careful consideration of cultural
Mhm.
sensitivities, legal requirements, and practical constraints. So, first of all, in what ways do cultural differences and regional regulations pose challenges to implementing inclusive R&R strategies? And how do you suggest companies effectively address these challenges?
I think, Sanjeevni, I will take a step back here. I think largely you highlighted two things. One is cultural differences, and second is evolving regulations.
Yes.
I think, look, it's important to, and I'll give you an example, right? So largely today organizations have teams spread out across geographies. Now, what organizations try and do, and this is an approach saying that, hey, we should be trying to be diverse, diversity conscious. We want to be inclusive in our approach, and hence let's try and design solutions that cater to our workforce across locations. Now, what happens, Sanjeevni, is that because the cultural contexts are different, some of the linear programs that organizations want to design and deploy across locations often do not work. I will give you an example of a recognition program that we wanted to set up in one of our earlier organizations. The idea was that we were looking at 3 4 countries, including India, and some of the other countries were very very distant in very different continents with very different cultural context to start with, where there were countries which required frequent high touches, like the Indian cultural context. We also had countries in from Western Europe, countries like Israel, wherein people are fine doing their role. People are fine getting appreciated once a year through a pay revision or through annual bonus programs, and then they would not really appreciate a very very frequent R&R program being imposed upon them, and where the company thanks them for every small thing that they do. Look, now what happens typically is, while as an organization the desire is to be inclusive into whatever an organization does, often there are stumbling blocks, because what we end up doing is we try to create one framework which needs to accommodate all different countries, and because of which we end up creating complicated systems and processes which then do not suit the business needs of any countries. Look, the approach, Sanjeevni, here is that while as a principle Diversity and inclusiveness is an important design consideration to be looked at, and this is what I was saying in my first point, in my first question. We would still need to emphasize around the need to localize programs, and more so around rewards and recognition, benefits and compensation, so that we stay relevant to the local market practice as well. Now, while from a core theme, and extending this to our example, while from a core theme to be inclusive and to appreciate diverse workforce, we have programs, say for example recognition programs, which touches employees sitting across the globe. There, the framework needs to be set up in a manner where there is enough and more room for localization, so that the different cultural context in which all of us operate is taken into account, and countries are free to make their choices with respect to frequency, with respect to quantum, basis their local business needs. I think that's important. From a regulatory standpoint, I think some of the Western countries, and this is true in United States, and this is also a evolving area of work in European Union countries. These countries are seeing fairly strong legislative processes being enacted, which then makes transparency movements much more relevant, and brings reward transparency movements to the forefront. An example can be that, hey, for every position that's being hired for in the United States, you would necessarily need to post pay ranges, which then enable candidates to see the market ranges for every role and then make their decisions accordingly. Does that regulation apply in a country like India? The answer is no. Does this regulation apply anywhere in APAC today? The answer is no. However, probably these are some of the evolved practices that these societies as a whole have adopted in their constant endeavor to drive inclusivity and transparency. Look, as a society and as a country, we have still not reached there. This is a journey that, as a civilization, we need to transgress, and this will take some time for us to kind of mature and reach the level of maturity that we see in certain evolved locations like United States and the European Union. So I think from a legislative standpoint, from a regulatory framework standpoint, I think we have evolved. The Maternity Act being a case in point, wherein I think we have tried to imbibe the best practices from countries in Europe, and have tried to create safeguards for our women workforce. But I think there is still a fair path to move forward. Yep.
I'm sure measuring the effectiveness of inclusive R&R programs is essential for organizations to assess their impact and make necessary adjustments. This may again involve collecting feedback from employees and analyzing metrics such as satisfaction rates and retention, and evaluating overall productivity levels. So how do you recommend organizations approach the evaluation of their R&R initiatives on a global scale, considering the diverse needs and expectations of their workforce?
Yeah, look, Sanjeevani, that's a great question. I think in today's world, there is a cost of $1 for every program that we run. I think, look, typically organizations would organizations would leverage internal listening mediums to understand the feedback around benefits and well-being programs. Would slice and dice the data by diversity groups to understand, are the favorability ratings similar, or is there a pocket that can be is there a challenge in any of the pockets, and if the challenge can be addressed. And I think organizations run similar surveys once in 6 months to understand, hey, are we doing things right? Is there a need for us to do anything more? Are we addressing different needs that people have, and different needs that different groups of people in the organizations have, right? And I think that's while organizations are doing that, I think it's also important to look at two other areas. One, in today's world, which is social media driven and is a social media heavy world, I think you would have organizations, the reputation of or the risks around reputation, right? Being up there on social media sites, places like Glassdoors, where every organization has a rating, and every organization has a rating around multiple pillars around career development, well-being, wellness, compensation, and so on and so forth. I think it's important for organizations to keep an eye out for some of these reputational risks, as I would want to call it out. Or then this, or on the flip side, this becomes a great branding tool that organizations can leverage to attract best in class talent. I think that's important. Third, I think it is also important to look at end outcome matrices. Matrices like retention is definitely something that organizations target, and then break retention into things which are much more meaningful, like, hey, am I looking at new higher retention? Am I really looking at regrettable retention? Am I looking at critical talent retention? Am I looking at diverse talent retention? And then try and measure some of these outcomes over a period of time, incorporate some of the changes to the well-being, wellness, benefits, and R&R program that organizations have kind of built into in their journey, and then look at data from a timeline standpoint, from a comparative standpoint, and see if some of these programs have led to positive outcomes. Look, the only way to manage or run an outcome analysis is through isolating the entire event. While such isolations typically have been done by organizations to manage effectiveness of rewards, to manage effectiveness of learning programs, I think for reward programs this becomes very, very difficult. So the entire concept of running a reward program for a small batch of people with a small pilot and then making it a full blown exercise typically doesn't work, and hence organizations would still stick to traditional listening mediums, and then use means like social media ratings, and then measure end outcomes to cross verify whether some of their programs are working or not.
True. Again, Meghdoot, we are arriving at the end of today's episode. But before we let you go, there's one last thing that both our listeners and I'd love to know your take on. Looking ahead, what emerging trends do you see in the development and implementation of inclusive R&R strategies on a global scale? So, is there any particular trend that you're noticing in R&R at this point in time?
Yeah, I think great question. So I think, Sanjeevani, as we move forward, right, and as we move forward into a tech-enabled world, I think the trends that we are looking at is personalization. So I think uh, if you look at the overall journey, organization typically, and this is more in the R&R space. So traditionally, organizations started with a one-size-fit-all approach, whether it's compensation, whether it's benefits, whether it's wellness, and wellness was largely non-existent. I think from there, it was more of a customized approach that organizations went into, saying that, hey, I might look at slightly different compensation elements. I would look at slightly different benefit different elements for different organizations, different functions, different departments, or different locations. I think we have transcended the one size fit all and the customization approach. I think as we move forward and technology has enabled some of these, I think we are moving to the area of personalized benefits and well-being programs, or personalized R&R, as we would like to call it, which means that how do we leverage technology platforms? How do we leverage the wealth of data that everyday, you know, let's call it everyday working or everyday living throws up? And how do we make programs which are customized to needs of large cohorts of employees? These programs can be around better flexibility in terms of overall benefit packages. This can be also personalization of R&R or recognition choices, right? And case in point being, traditionally, if you have done well in your projects or in your work, your managers would give you a certificate, right? And that's a standard offering to employees as a pat on the back reward, saying that, hey, employee, you've done great. Now, the world evolved to saying that, hey, besides a certificate, can you also give a standard, monetary recognition? And hence, companies said, along with the certificate, you get a cash voucher, or you get a voucher for any of those e-commerce sites of a certain preordained values, right?
Yeah.
So that was the approach. As organizations move forward, I think the trend is around what I said is around personalization, which means that you would see a bunch of startups or a bunch of new age companies offering adopting a digital first approach and offering employees with choice, saying that, hey, employee, now you have done great. We as an organization, we appreciate the kind of effort that you put in. Look, we are providing you with 10,000 rupees or $1,000. Why don't you choose something that makes most sense for you, even in terms of rewards? No, you can use it to buy something that makes sense to you, or do you want to spend it on a bunch of experiences that you want to, leverage to make sense of your and your family's needs? Companies have started, have taken this a level further and have said that, look, we don't want to personalize rewards only for individual employees, but what can we do to enable a team setting, right? If a team comes together, works as a pod, achieves an outcome as a pod, I think they need to be recognized as a team and not as a bunch of individuals. So how do we then provide a team with a bunch of choice, which they can leverage to do something together, more like an experience? It fosters team building. It fosters a culture of collaboration. It appreciates the right spirits that organizations would typically want to drive. And then it also gives people the choice that, hey, uh, can you spend an amount that an organization has given to you on a bunch of things that you like? And then the entire piece around hyper personalization becomes easier with technology. And then it also becomes easier for the teams running some of these programs to budget for such programs, run and administer such programs, and then take feedback from such programs and continuously refine the offering. So I think these are largely avenues that I see in terms of R&R and overall well-being to emerge as organizations move forward. I think that's largely the future. Obviously, as organizations continue and the business cycles continue to operate as they operate, there will be cycles of peaks and troughs, which means that there will be times where organizations will have budgets. There will be times where organizations will find it difficult to accommodate some of their desired practices, and that's been a struggle forever, right? So that's going to be an ongoing challenge. Hence, there will be greater appreciation for every dollar that is spent, greater focus on ROI conversation. Do we really need it? Does some of the offerings make more sense? Does it create an impact for the employee? And hence, is it even relevant to the employee? And hence the need to personalize some of these offerings so that it's targeted, it's relevant, it's not one size fit all approach. And we look to employees as our internal customers, and we try and offer people what they would typically want to suit the needs that they have in life better. So that's the evolving trend that we are all moving towards.
Great. So we have reached the end of today's episode. Do you have any message for our listeners? Our listeners will be delighted to hear it from you. Also, our audience might want to stay in touch with you post this podcast. So it would be great if you could tell them how they can reach out to you.
Yeah. So Sanjeevni, I think I get enthused by talking and connecting with people. I am available over LinkedIn. So yeah, folks who are interested can definitely reach out, and we can definitely connect over an interesting conversation. I think my message to listeners, I think, thank you for being part of this discussion and being a patient audience. But I think what's important as a key takeaway, if I was you at this point of time, I would be reflecting around things like, look, we have been discussing around diversity, we have been discussing around inclusion, and we have been discussing about a bunch of R&R, streams, if I call it, cutting across compensation, benefits, and well-being.
Yes.
But I think I would want all of you to take a step back and urge all of you to kind of go back to the why question. Why do what we are doing? How does it relate to our business philosophy and our business strategy? Uh, Even if we are launching a program, how does it even make sense? How does it add value to business? Because I think that if we are able to answer some of these questions, that's when it adds real value, and that's when we would be able to create programs which not only appreciates diversity and are inclusive, but are also able to create program which is more aligned to the needs of business and are able to stay up to the aspirations that people have from ourselves.
Thank you so much, Meghdoot, for joining today's episode. And we're really grateful to have you with us today. So thanks a lot. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Sanjeevani. Pleasure was all mine. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to the Vantage HR Influencers Podcast. Please do subscribe to Vantage HR Influencers Podcast on Apple Podcast, Spotify, and our YouTube channel for new episodes.